Hey guys, my name is Veggie, and this is my Swain guide.
I'm a cool girl, I'm a cool girl. Ice cold, I roll my eyes at you, boy. I'm a cool girl, I'm a cool girl. Ice cold, I roll my eyes at you, boy. I'm a cool girl, I'm a cool girl. Ice cold, I roll my eyes at you, boy.
Welcome to Veggie's Swain Guide. This guide is going to be covering everything from the basic concepts to advanced gameplay for Swain. I'll be using timestamps in the description below, so you can skip to the section you want to look at if you don't want to view the other sections. So, why pick Swain? Swain is a champion that doesn't require difficult mechanics, only decision making. If you're not focused on a champion's mechanics, you can focus on punishing your opponent's mistakes and improve on your own decision making, thus making you a better player as a whole. You don't have many difficult matchups, and it's all based on the choices that you make. Was my teleport good? Can I go for a kill here? Should I turn off my ultimate? It's not the champion, it's the player's fundamentals of good decision making. I think that he is a good champion for learning the game at any level of play. Here's what Coach LS has to say about Swain.
Two other champions that I want to talk about really quickly are the AD and AP mega bullies of top and mid lane. That's going to be Swain and Pantheon. If you haven't ever played Pantheon or Swain before, it's a nightmare to go up against them in lane because of how obnoxious they are. It's really difficult to lose laning phase as either one if you've put even a little bit of time into the champions, and because they're so oppressive, again at lower MMR, it induces tilt from your opponents. And because lower MMR players are less likely to have emotional control to not just tilt into their opponents or get frustrated with their teammates or feeling like they're losing so they have to have this carry mentality, it plays right into your hands and lets you get a very big carry going.
With that being said, we're going to enter the first section, which are his abilities. Swain's passive is Carry and Renewal. Each time Swain kills a unit or a tower, he gets some mana back. If you get a takedown on a champion, which is a kill or an assist, you also get 9% of your maximum mana back. Swain's Q is Decrepify. His bird's name is Beatrice. When you cast Q, you send Beatrice to an area, and she stands there for 4 seconds. Beatrice will attack enemies that are in that area, and she will prioritize the target of your E ability, which is Torment, champions, and then minions. You want to max this ability first, as with every rank, you slow the target more, which will help you land your other abilities. Swain's W is Never Move. Swain marks a targeted area, and after a delay, units inside are snared. You max this ability second because the duration of the snare is extended with each rank, going from 1 second to 2 full seconds. This ability takes some time to get used to in order to learn the timing of it, and you really want to use your Q to increase the chances of landing the snare. Swain's E is Torment. This is a point-and-click ability that deals damage over 4 seconds and amplifies all of your other damage, excluding Ignite, by 20%. Back before his rework, this was the ability you maxed first, but now you max it last. Swain's R is Ravenous Flock. So on toggle, you become a big bird. You have little birds flying out of you, which prioritize champions and hit enemies. After the bird hits an enemy, it flies back to you and heals you. You heal more from hitting champions than from hitting non-champions. This ability costs more mana the longer you have it on, so be careful on how long you keep it on because you might run out of mana during team fights. Welcome to Chapter 2, Itemization. So, Swain is a mage. Some itemization changes were made for patch 7.9. As such, his starting items are the standard Doran's Ring with 2 health potions. Swain has no escapes in his kit, so he needs extra health in the early game in order to be able to survive. Your Doran's Ring also adds onto your passive, so every time you kill a unit, you get a bit of mana back, which allows you to harass more. Alternatively, Doran's Shield has gotten an update which allows you to sustain yourself in lane when receiving poke. This is a good starting item for lanes such as Karma, Talia, Vel'koz, as your only trade-off with Doran's Ring is the amount of mana you get back from last-hitting minions and the early AP bonus that Doran's Ring gives. From here, we'll move on to his core items. The most common item on Swain is Rod of Ages. Swain needs a lot of health and mana because he is played as a frontline mage. You walk into the enemy team and start soaking up some damage, using your ultimate to heal up and stay in combat. The extra mana from Rod of Ages allows you to stay in your ultimate form longer. 15% of the damage you take from enemy champions is gained as mana, which allows you to stay in the frontline for extended periods of time. Your shoes are situational. Ninja Tabi and Mercury Treads are most optimal for survivability, allowing you to take less damage during long fights so you stay alive longer, which, allows you to deal more damage. But you may also want to consider Sorcerer's Shoes for extra damage, especially if you're ahead. Alongside these two items, you'll want to add your next core item, Zhonya's Hourglass, to your inventory. Zhonya's Hourglass does not interrupt your ultimate, which allows you to get 2.5 seconds of free damage and healing. And this item is essential to Swain's mid-game teamfighting. Next, your damage item that is core is Liandry's Torment. Swain's damage is not all at once, but more of damage over time. Liandry's is helpful because the damage that you dish out from all your abilities can hit multiple enemies, which allows the Liandry's to be maximized in terms of efficiency. If you also slow or snare your opponents using your Q or W respectively, you also deal extra burn damage. From here, we get very situational. Most of the time, the best buy is Void Step because your damage will basically become true piercing damage at that point. Another situational item you can consider purchasing early if you have some extra gold is the Dark Seal. Dark Seal is a quick snowball item that can become equivalent to a blasting wand at maximum stacks. When you're playing Swain, you'll be teamfighting a lot, or using teleport to come around for assists and kills, thus stacking Dark Seal. If the enemy team has a lot of AD damage dealers like Graves, Zed, Caitlyn, Fiora, an option you can consider is Frozen Heart. Frozen Heart grants you flat mana, a ton of armor, cooldown reduction, and a unique passive that allows you to slow the enemy's attack speed, which also allows you to become a stronger frontline mage. You can also consider Thornmail because it gives a lot of raw armor that allows you to reflect a ton of auto attack damage from the opponents. If the enemy team has a lot of magic damage dealers like Brand, Elise, Syndra, Nautilus, you can consider two options: Banshee's Veil and or Spirit Visage. Now, before this patch, the original item was supposed to be Abyssal Scepter, but due to the changes they've made to Banshee's Veil and Abyssal Scepter, the tables have turned, and Banshee's Veil is a much more optimal defensive item for Swain. Since he's a frontline, I would consider Banshee's Veil, because you get a bubble to block an incoming spell, as well as some AP damage. While the recent changes to Spirit Visage grant a higher healing percentage, having a Banshee's Veil that gives damage, cooldown, and a bubble that blocks a potentially threatening spell can change how teamfights are played by both sides of the battlefield. There are benefits to purchasing Spirit Visage, however. Spirit Visage can be utilized while in the stasis form of Zhonya's Hourglass, allowing you to obtain 2.5 seconds of free, amplified healing. Visage gives you long-term sustain, provided that you can keep your ultimate up long enough for it to be effective, whereas Banshee's Veil gives you more damage. Another consideration would be Rabadon's Death Cap. You usually want to buy this item last due to the cost, or buy it early if you're just overly fed, but not before you complete your core. Death Cap provides raw damage and more healing off of your ultimate. You can also consider Hextech GLP as an alternative to Rod of Ages. There are some pros and cons to purchasing Rod of Ages over GLP on Swain. Hextech costs 300 more gold than Rod of Ages. Rod of Ages has a 10-minute scaling, whereas GLP doesn't, but GLP makes up for it with the Icicle active. Rod of Ages usually gets completed around the 10 to 14 minute mark, depending on how well you farm with Swain, whereas GLP would take an additional 1 to 2 due to the difference in gold. Rod of Ages will always outscale GLP because of the stats that it provides, hence why Rod is the main core item. The early difference is that the mana you get from a fully stacked Rod of Ages is the same as what the GLP provides initially, but the GLP gives lower health and AP than a fully stacked Rod. When it comes to damage output, Swain doesn't really need that extra GLP burst, as he has enough CC already with his kit. You can definitely take it to look fancy and shoot ice though. Another item that is controversial is Rylai's. Rylai's is in a weird spot for Swain because there are a lot of Swain players that like it and players that don't. It is useful in the sense that if you build it with Liandry's, you will always get double damage off of the Liandry's burn passive. So if you ease someone with Liandry's and Rylai's in your inventory, they take 12% of their current health over 3 seconds rather than 6%. With Rylai's, when you get into the front line, you have more health, and the AoE from your ultimate allows you to slow up to 5 enemy players at the same time, which allows your team to catch up to you and deal damage. It's good, but it's personal preference. If you ever thought about buying Luden's Echo, don't. The reason why is because Luden's Echo does not proc off of each of your birds. If it did, then every Swain player would run it, and you'd be gaining stacks constantly during teamfights and unleashing loads of burst damage, but sadly it doesn't, so it's ineffective. With the mana issues Swain faces, let's talk about Morello Namicon. Morello's is a good purchase for Swain, but not early. Morello's offers Swain flat mana, cooldown, damage, grievous wounds, and a mana restoration upon takedowns. While all of these are great, you have to remember that Swain needs survivability in the early game, so I would suggest Morello's under the situation that you're up against a team comp that has a lot of sustained healing, such as Vladimir and Soraka. It's a great item because you can cut their healing as well as keep your ultimate on longer whenever you get a takedown due to the mana restoration passive, but it should not be an item that you rush first very early on into the game. Lastly, another item that is suggested against a multi-tank team comp is Tear of the Goddess and Archangel Staff or Seraph's Embrace. Tear is an item that you build early before you buy your Rod of Ages. By buying Tear, you delay the purchase of your Rod of Ages by a few minutes. Here are the cons of buying Tear. If you don't get a lot of kills, your itemization is going to be delayed. You also don't get a power spike upon recall. Typically, a player buys something worth their gold in the mid lane, such as Lost Chapter for 900 gold, or 3 longswords, or a serrated dirk if you're Zed or something, but Tear provides nothing beneficial for you until level 6. Typically, a player will purchase Catalyst, which makes Swain a bit more durable for his laning phase, but by buying Tear, you have nothing but a bigger mana pool and no extra health. Now, for the pros of buying Tear, it allows you to maintain your ultimate duration for an extended period of time. With this being said, your typical itemization after Rod of Ages, Shoes, and Zanyas would have you build Archangels after. This way, it will ramp up to a Seraph's Embrace quicker, and you will have a ton of mana to just run it down with your ulti. The big reason why it's good is because your ult's mana cost increases by 5 each second, but Tear refunds you 15% of your spell's cost, and Archangels refunds 25%. This allows you to extend your ult duration for a few extra seconds, which can be life-saving. As I mentioned earlier, Spirit Visage is better if you can maintain your ultimate up for a long time. Well, with Tear, you have that option taken care of. Just remember that you put yourself at a big risk and delay your early game and a bit of your mid game with the purchase of Tear, but your late game is much stronger. So in conclusion, there are items that you need on Swain that are for his core, which will allow you to deal damage in teamfights, and then after that, he's purely situational. There's no set in stone build, so you build what you think you need to deal the most damage and stay alive the longest for teamfights. Now we get into chapter 3, the real gameplay of Swain. We're going to first start with the skill order. When it comes to the first 2 levels of Swain's skill order, you could either start E or Q. If the matchup is long range, such as Cassiopeia, Syndra, Xerath, or melee pokers with gap closers, champions like Renekton, Fiora, Irelia, Pantheon, you can also start Q first. If you start Q first, you're usually looking to poke your opponents down or zone them from CSing in lane. If you start E first, you're usually looking for trades with your auto attacks early on. You want to get the other ability at level 2, so if you start E, you get Q at level 2, and then W at level 3, and if you start Q at level 1, then you get E at level 2, and then you get W at level 3. So as I mentioned earlier, you want to max your Q first. This is because your Q does the most damage out of all your other abilities, and as you rank it up, the slope becomes heavier, going from 20% to 40%. You also use it to help push waves because Swain doesn't have any real form of fast wave clear. You then want to max your W second because your W grants you a longer root duration, which is crucial when it comes to mid game, as Swain is most powerful when it comes to the mid game. You make one really good pick with your snare, and that can change the tides of the game. You want to max your E ability last because the damage application of 20% is what it's really used for. The difference in ranks between the abilities is just the damage that the E does. Back before Swain's rework, you'd max this ability first because it was your only reliable source of damage and the amplification did not start at 20%. But now it just sticks at a solid 20%, so you don't really need to max it first anymore. Lastly, whenever you have the chance to rank your R ability, you just rank it up. More birds, more damage, more healing. Next, his summoner spells. We always want to take Flash. Secondary summoners are usually either Teleport or Ignite. If I'm mid lane, most of the time I'll run Ignite, but sometimes with lane bullies like Cassiopeia, I'd like to take Teleports and look for flanks. Never underestimate the power of a Flash E, Ignite auto attack, or the threat of a Flash snare. When you have Teleport, if you get into a matchup that involves a lot of early game pressure, since Swain is most vulnerable in the early game, you can use Teleport to come back into the lane and reset yourself. Always look for flanks in the late game with Swain. A really good flank with a slow and bind could turn the game around when you have Zanyas. It's insane. Now we move on to his runes. There's only one rune page that I typically run, which is the standard mage page. Magic penetration reds, scaling health yellows, which you can swap out for armor yellows if you're up against an AD matchup like Zed or Talon, 6 cooldown reduction per level blues, and 3 flat MR blues. You can also swap out the MR blues for scaling MR, or flat ability power, or scaling ability power. And of course, 3 AP quints. 6 cooldown reduction blues added with Zanya's Spear Visage, Banshee's Veil, and a blue buff will give you 40% CDR. Finally, we'll be moving on to Masteries. There are 2 Mastery pages that you run on Swain. The standard approach for Swain is for you to go 18 points into the Ferocity tree, because you want to take Deathfire Touch as your keystone. Along the Ferocity tree, you also want to take Fresh Blood. In the early game, you trade with your autos a lot, so this increases your lane trading. You then want to take 1 point in Vampirism. A lot of players take 1 point just because it can save them. You then want to make sure that you get Battle Trance because you stay in combat for a long time, guaranteeing increased damage. From there, the other 12 points go down 2 other options, either the Cunning tree or the Resolve tree. The more common tree is to take 12 points in Resolve. If you opt to go into the Cunning tree, you want to take 5 points in Savagery for easier last hitting, since Swain's last hitting is pretty rough. You want to point in Assassin because in lane, you trade for the most part, and you'll most likely be alone, whether you're top or mid, so you get in some extra damage. You then want to take 5 points in Meditation because it's your only resource of regenerating mana, just so you can hold on to your ult for a few extra seconds. You want to take Greenfather's Gift. When you're in the top lane, your E auto trades are stronger because it does damage off of the target's current health percentage. And the cooldown for Greenfather's Gift is the same as the cooldown for your E. You also drop minion aggro when you hide in the bush after auto attacking, so you maximize the effectiveness of your trades. If you opt to go into the Resolve tree, you want to put points into the Health Regeneration Mastery for lane sustain, then get Runic Armor for increased healing, and of course, Insight for more summoner spells. Typically on Swain, lower cooldown of Teleport and Flash will allow for more plays. A lower Teleport allows you to match roams from enemy laners sooner, or allows you to get back into the lane more frequently if you were poked down. Alternatively, instead of Insight, you can choose Fearless. Fearless grants the player bonus armor and magic resist after receiving damage from an enemy champion. For trading, this is one of my favorite masteries because as you get higher in levels, the bonus increases, allowing you to stay alive longer in teamfights or trade in lane more effectively. So now that you have all the pre-game startups for Swain, let's get to actually playing him in the game. We'll start off with top lane matchups. For my Swain guide, however, I prefer going mid lane with Swain. Keep in mind that some of the champions that I name in top lane can also be played in the mid lane. As a disclaimer, gameplay footage copyrights their respective owners.
Hesitation is death.
So, Aatrox is a melee matchup, and as with all melee matchups, you want to pressure the target for CS. Usage of your E auto attack is very efficient here because early on, he can't really respond to you, unless he lands his skillshot poke. Aatrox also has a big gap closer that can knock you up. You don't want to just walk up and take a reckless or super aggressive trade with your E auto Q because if he lands his knock up, he's going to out trade you. Your best bet is to hold on and farm and toss E autos, then hide in the bush. At 6, you can sustain yourself with your ult and 1v1 him. If you drop too many Qs, you might end up pushing the lane because the first response that a player will do is walk out of Q range, especially melees. If you push this lane, then you open yourself to more gank potentials and Aatrox can just jump on you and slice you up. That's why it is better for you to poke only every now and then with your Q. Let the lane push towards your tower so you can farm safely. Aatrox will typically itemize Blade of the Ruin King, but he can delay his blade by building Hexdrinker, Merc Treads, and Executioner's Calling in order to outduel you. He has a lot of attack speed, so without Blade he's still strong. Your goal as Swain is to out-CS the enemy, to the best of your ability, and get your core items to start creating pressure via grouping.
Understood.
So Akali's laning phase is extremely weak pre-level 6. Once she hits 6, she can actually deal a load of damage, as well as close a large distance between you using her ultimate. Pre-6, you want to pressure her a lot when she tries to CS to deny her as much as possible. The lane will favor you, but once 6 comes, she will try to jump on you, so just play it safe and probably call for a jungler. Her W ability also denies your Q because Beatrice can't attack targets that she can't see, as she kinda acts like an attacking ward. If you manage to tag her with your E though, the stealth changes will allow you to locate her. Don't underestimate her burst, because she can just kill you even if you have your ultimate on.
I will wait for you to be better.
For this matchup, you have the advantage, but you're going to be moving a lot. You want to stay far back so that she doesn't get her Q autos off on you, or her W. You want to be actively aware of the fact that she can use her E to gap close and hit you, so you don't want to push the lane because you'll open yourself up to an enemy gank. You want to dodge her W slow whenever she uses it because that's the only ability that she can pressure you with. Also be careful when she hits 6 because her ulti, which briefly makes her untargetable, can be used to dodge your snare or like trap you under tower or split you from your team or something. So this matchup is basically a farm matchup, but he can all-in you at 6. His true damage ultimate could catch you by surprise, and if he manages to walk up, silence you, he'll increase his probability of landing his rupture, which then sets you up to be hit by his autos and eaten. For the most part, early game, you can try to harass him and deny him CS so that he doesn't get his passive to trigger, which gives him sustain, by the way. But it's not really reliable because eventually you're going to push it to his tower and then he's just going to last it easily under tower and sustain up. So just do your best to out-farm him and out-group him with your teleports because this matchup is rough because he's a tank.
I do not tolerate cowardice.
So the Darius matchup is going to be one that involves fighting, but long skirmishes in the early game favor Darius. One misplay can skewer the matchup into either player's favor. So let's identify what Darius can do. Darius has his E, which is his pull. He has a passive that causes bleeding damage. He has an auto attack reset that slows. And he has his Q, which does a lot of damage if he hits you with the blade of the axe that also heals him. The first and foremost thing is that you can't just let him walk up to you and E you into him. If he's running Colossus, that'll give him a shield that makes him win the trade. If he's running Grasp, he'll get it off for free because he's going to be staying in long enough in combat with you to get his full combo off. Now if he's running Storm Raiders, don't even think about trading back with E or auto attack, as his short burst damage is enough to proc Storm Raiders, which means that there's no escape from him. Darius players start running Ghost and Flash, so they're going to be looking to punish you hard. When Darius starts moving, your best goal is to throw your Q down to slow him, and auto attack your way back. If you think he's still gaining speed, don't auto. When he turns around to run away, you can throw your E back at him. The matchup doesn't generally seem to go your way due to the fact that he has a lot of mixed damage and can burst you relatively faster than your damage over time can sustain you back. Even if you dodge all of his abilities, his bleed damage can still hurt if you let him auto you. Be careful in this matchup, as I said, one misstep can swing it in his favor.
Ignorant thralls!
Diana is a champion that is really slow and patient in the early game, but when she hits 6, she has the power to one-shot your backline champions. She has relatively little CC unless she's up in your face. In the early game, pressure her as much as you can because once she is level 6, the tables might turn. Playing against her, if you can throw your standard EQ auto attack harass on her while she tries to last hit, it's an advantage. Because typically she'll respond with the shield to negate the trade, but she'll end up pushing the lane with the way the shield works. With that being said, she'll also try to back up from your Q, which means that you'll end up keeping the lane just around the middle. Diana is mobile pre-6, so you can definitely let the lane push towards you, poke her with your Q and E, and call for ganks.
Mundo think you a big sissy.
Dr. Mundo is a really straightforward matchup. He has a cleaver skill shot, which you can avoid simply by moving into the minion wave. He has an auto attack reset, a massive health regeneration ultimate, and basically a Sunfire cape with his W. This matchup is a farm matchup because you guys can't really kill each other. Mundo just builds Grasp with the Undying, then a ton of magic resist with Visage to increase his ultimate's healing, and Merc Treads to tank you. You just simply have to farm and spam your Q and E on him. While you may not kill him, it will annoy him, and Swain's goal is to be really annoying after all.
Poor form.
So Fiora is another matchup where the scales can tip in your favor, but she has the advantage early on. If she uses her parry to negate your snare, especially when you're chasing her, she basically has a mini get out of jail free card. She also has a lot of gap closers early, which can pressure you. When you play the lane, try to lean towards the wall in order to attempt to deny the vitals from being activated, because if she activates them, she basically wins the trade, and does a ton of damage. You win the poke war with your typical combo, of course.
Back to sleep then.
So Galio is actually a pretty rough matchup. The guy has a gap closer and a taunt. He also has a devastating ult and a way to zone you off of CS. You want to try to survive this matchup and root him whenever he tries to ult. You win with better team fights, but for the most part he's a full tank, so your damage is meaningless. He also has really good wave clear with triple Doran's ring and can pressure you by shoving your minions into the tower. Just try your best to farm and poke him down like you usually do with other tank matchups. Remember that he needs to build Spirit Visage as well as probably Rod of Ages or something in order to be able to be relevant in the mid game.
I'll come back stronger.
Gangplank is one of the most favorable matchups for Swain. Swain has range and Gangplank has to make a choice. If he goes to Q creeps for money for his Silver Serpents, then he cannot respond to any of your trades and aggression. E-autoing him in the early game is best when the creeps are low, because if he shoots you, then he misses the creeps, because he can't walk up to melee range and slash it for free without you punishing him in return. When you hit 2, you can outrange him with your Q. You can then focus your attention onto his barrels with your autos, while still continuing to EQ him and snare him to all-in him when you find the opportunity. You'll be able to ramp up a lot more quickly than him, which will allow you to snowball other lanes, with teleport or like walking down and roaming. The only way he can respond to your roams is with his ultimate.
Fear is the first of many foes.
Garen's that top laner that runs it down on you when he has his Q up and then spins all over you, but that doesn't mean you're going to have a hard time with him. You can just keep poking the Garen down with Q since you max that ability first, and of course the typical E auto attack combo. When he runs at you, just drop your Q and back up. He builds tankies, but he can also rush Cleaver as well as Executioners early with Merc Treads to tank your poke, but you can still poke him to deny him from CSing. This is easily a farm lane for you, and you can stop him from running at you. He's not like Darius who can just kill you swiftly. Garen players typically run grass, but there are some cheese-ass Garens that'll run Storm Raiders. It's similar to the Darius matchup, just don't let him hit you with Q, because if he hits you with Q, you're not going to be able to run. It's harder for Garen to proc Storm Raiders, but once he gets a Phage, he'll stay on top of you because the Phage is passive. If you get low, be careful because Garen's just going to press R and deal so much damage that you'll die when you least expect it.
Shabanova.
In his mini form, Gnar is actually really weak and prone to harass once you dodge his Q. In his mega form, however, you can still trade effectively with him because he's melee. The only thing that you really have to sidestep in his mega form is his W and his Q, and of course you can still afford to get hit by them because you can just use your ultimate to match him. If he slams you into the wall, that's usually an indicator that you're getting ganked. And you're in for some trouble because the amount of CC that he can chain together, his slam stun into the wall, his W stun, and then his Q boulder slow, will allow the enemy team to set up for a 1v2 fight. Despite all of that though, the matchup favors you well and you should be able to outfarm him.
Yeah.
Gragas is a popular top lane tank right now. Typically this matchup is a farm and poke matchup, but it's easily in your favor. He can avoid your snare with his body slam, and he has a way to sustain through your poke of E, auto, and Q with his passive, as well as his W to mitigate the damage that he takes. He can also set up ganks really well with his E, Q, and his R at 6. For this lane, this is a farm lane until the jungler shows up. It's kinda hard to catch Gragas if he uses his E.
I'll be fuddling.
Heimerdiner is a rough matchup because he pushes you to your tower constantly. The only thing here is that you can use your Q to kill off his turrets, but this matchup should be one that you're not looking to really trade with the Heimer, but to survive in CS as much as you can because you're going to be at your tower for the most part. Heimerdiner's purpose is to induce tilt, but you can avoid that if you just play safe under tower. The only risk is try not to lose your tower, and just farm it out.
Life is too short for fear.
This is a pretty fun matchup for Swain. So don't try to all-in her at 6 because Illaoi excels at fighting multiple champions. The best thing that you could do is free farm and get mana back from her tentacles, and then move a lot to avoid getting slapped by her tentacles because the damage actually does add up. When you get free mana for last hitting those tentacles, you can use more spells to trade back with Illaoi. This is a very, very easy farm matchup for Swain, so you can get a lot of gold off of her tentacles and trade efficiently with her. Just don't try to all-in her and eat damage from her ultimate.
There's no turning back.
Irelia is a kind of rough matchup for Swain since she has a lot of sustain and all-in potential. So what you should do in the matchup for melees is pressure with Q and E, but you want to skill up Q at level 1. Irelia players take Q at level 1 to get a double gap closer and pressure at level 2 for an all-in. You can use your Q to poke or take CS from a safe distance. Irelia players who build Blade of the Ruin King will be able to successfully all-in you due to the damage based on health at level 6. With an early Hexdrinker into a Maw, into an Executioner's Calling, and a Merc Treads, if you aren't careful, she will land a stun on you, and you can't really escape her, since she, has a double dash to minions. Your goal in this lane is just to stay even in CS and survive at a fairly safe distance.
Who dares defy my will?
So here's another gap closer champion that's a rough matchup for you. Basically, Jarvan can level up Q at level 1, then use it to shove the lane, in which case you don't really have a way to respond to it because your Q can't push as fast as his can, and your E doesn't really affect him as much as you think. With all his Q pushing at level 1, this will allow him to push to level 2 faster, and then that'll give him the EQ all-in combo. So if he's running Ignite or some kind of like damage mastery up at top lane, you're going to be taking a lot of damage, and he'll just straight up try to kill you. If you don't get level 2 cheese, then you can basically re-establish control of the lane with your standard poke combo of Q, E, auto attack, and then you'll be able to survive him at 6, even though he has his ultimate. And once he itemizes his Executioners, Maw, Merc Treads versus you, you basically can't really kill him without running out of mana. So overall, this matchup becomes a bruiser kind of battle in the top lane.
Let me at him.
Jax is a relatively simple matchup for you. You can easily poke him down with your QE auto attack and stay back away from his Q jump range. You should not be able to let him walk up to you and auto attack you, because he will typically follow up his combo with his E to use it to dodge minion aggro, thereby maximizing his trade. Typically, Jaxes will also itemize Maw against you, maybe an Executioner's Calling, and then they get Titanic Hydra and Trinity Force, and then they go full tank. Going magic resist early, as well as the items that I've stated, kind of delays his damage output and isn't part of his typical core. So you win this matchup if you don't let him jump on you.
Never look back.
Jayce is a fairly interesting matchup. He has early game range advantage and wave clear, but that doesn't mean you can't outtrade him. If you start Q or E, you basically draw him away from CSing, but his ranged into melee hammer combo to all in you is actually quite strong. Typically, Jayce players will build Mortal Reminder down the line, so they're going to build Executioner's Calling early against you to reduce your healing. And then of course Black Cleaver, the Maw, Merc Treads, they're all really strong items against you. Jayce's poke is pretty rough, but you can try to sustain through it. If he all-ins you and he doesn't have a Hex Drinker or Maw, you can win the all-in because your QWE, birds, and auto attacks deal a lot of damage. Poking him with your E while he's trying to CS, especially if he is in his hammer form, is a way to tip the scales in your favor.
Into the fray.
Kayle is a very stable matchup for Swain. You can just sit back and farm it out. Kayle has a lot of bursts and will typically run Storm Raiders or Thunderlords, sometimes Fervors or Wind Speakers. She can run it down and attack you, but you can sustain versus her as well. Your Q will be your friend for this matchup, but try not to walk up and use your E auto because she can just trade you back with her Q auto, which does equally as much if not more damage. Your ultimate should be able to outclass her ultimate since she only gets a few seconds of invulnerability, whereas you can just run it down on her.
A silent death.
So Kennen is a fairly back and forth matchup, even though there are two different ways to play Kennen. Either way, your goal is to avoid his Q. If Kennen is AP, Kennen's burst damage alongside his ult is going to cut you down and you're going to lose a lot of health with his poke. If Kennen is AD on hit, then staying up close is going to get you ripped apart with his consistent auto attacks and his ability to stun you. You can just sit back and use your Q and E to poke him down, whether or not he plays AP or AD. It's a fairly safe matchup for you. He also has a lot lower base health than you and typically doesn't build tank. The only items that he needs to build that are very tanky are Merc Treads. So just sit back, Q, E, farm, poke, standard.
Oh, I knew you was all yellow.
Kled is a strong champion and can use the power of Skarl to pressure you. Kled's teamfighting with his ultimate is quite strong, so during the laning phase you can poke him a lot with the typical combo of Q, E, auto attack, but when you all in him with the snare, be patient and wait for Skarl to hop off, otherwise it's kind of like Fizz, you just miss it. Remember to stay back because his W allows him to hit the shit out of you for 4 times in a row, so that's gonna hurt.
Foolish child.
Lissandra is a top lane mage that's a relatively close matchup. Aside from the typical EQ combo that you use to poke, you want to save your snare for when she uses her E ability to run. If you shoot it where you think she'll end up, you can catch her after she blinks away. Even though you sit back behind minions, don't stand too close because her Q goes far through minions. She itemizes just like you, Rod of Ages, Zanyas, Leandries, Merc Treads, but she can also choose to go Morellos against you. So itemizing Merc Treads for yourself is a good way of reducing the duration of her snare and her ultimate.
You will lose.
Malphite is a very easy matchup, as with most tanks. Basically he gets a passive shield which can easily be broken with an E auto attack poke. You deny a lot of his CS with your typical EQ combo, but eventually Malphite will build so much magic resist to the point where it makes him impossible for you to kill. He can also poke you down if he chooses to, but for the most part you win this matchup.
I shall bring great suffering.
Mordekaiser's 3-hit combo and burst damage, along with the fact that he can take Storm Raiders, might catch you by surprise. His burst is explosive, and he also has the ability to finish you off with his ultimate dot. Like all other matchups, you want to use your Q to prevent him from walking up. Usually he'll turn on his W on himself as an indicator of him getting close to you. This way you know when to back up and win the trade.
Do not try my patience.
Nasus is a farm lane. Basically, you can just keep poking him in the early game because he has no magic resist, but eventually he'll build enough magic resist to take your damage. In the early game, at least until the first recall, you have an advantage because you are the AP lane bully that can pressure him. Just watch out for his wither because that indicates that you're getting ganked.
I will not rest.
Nautilus is another tank matchup that's fairly easy for you. If you're never in range for his E or his autos, then all you have to worry about is his hook, his point and click ultimate, and pushing to his tower. If you can dodge his hook, you win the trade, unless he's hooking the wall to close the distance between you and him. Then he'll cast his auto attacks and lock you down. His point and click ultimate is usually an indicator of you getting ganked, which means that you shouldn't be pushing too far up to allow that to happen. You can let the lane push to you, especially if Nautilus uses his E to push the lane towards you, and then you can just poke him back. Once he gets Visage or Abyssal and his Merc Treads, you'll have a difficult time poking him down because he has a lot more MR, but you should be able to win the farm game.
Leave nothing behind.
Olaf is a very simple matchup for you, but it shifts in control at level 6. Typically, Olaf will rush Black Cleaver if he's in the top lane, but he can put that off and simply build Executioner's Calling, as well as a Hex Drinker, and Merc Treads and Spectre's Cowl. He builds both tanky and damage, so he can rip you apart when he turns on his ultimate to disable all your slows and your snare, so you have to be careful. He can also mow you down with constant axes and his true damage E ability. So once he hits 6, just be aware that he has the ability to kill you. Consider that his ultimate gives him move speed towards champions, also resistances and raw AD, so he's gonna run you down.
They disgrace the art of war.
So Pantheon is known as an AD lane bully, just mentioned earlier in this video. However, when you put Swain and Pantheon in the same lane, only one of them can come out on top. You easily win trades in the early game against Pantheon. When he itemizes, he typically builds lethality for damage, but he can also itemize Hex Drinker and Executioner's Calling just to cut you down. You poke him down with your Q ability each time he tries to CS, and then you use your E auto attack in order to harass him. Also, the point of your auto attacks, get those in a lot because you gotta get rid of his shield block passive. At level 6, Pantheon doesn't have a power spike because he will usually level up his ult. If he scales up his ultimate and he misses it, you basically win every trade. And if he shows up to lane without using it, then you have 4 abilities and he has 3. So you basically win. Just be careful because Pantheon players are not supposed to take teleport. So an ignite full combo, if you aren't careful, can actually mess you up pretty hard.
Seems you left your brave pants at home. Want me to wait while you go get them?
So Poppy's a bit of a rough matchup if you're near walls. When she turns on her W, it shouldn't affect you because you don't have any gap closes or dashes, and her main method of trading is to use her ranged auto attack to poke you, then she picks up her shield to get a shield. You could try snaring her if she attempts to pick it up, and then poke her down with your E and Q. Poppies will typically build like Trinity Force or Iceborne Gauntlet, but after that they just go full tank, so that means that you won't really be dealing any damage to her, especially down the line. To make up for it, it just becomes a huge farm war, which, you know, Swain always wins those farm wars. Make sure you turn off your ultimate to conserve mana if she manages to land her ult on you, because you don't want to walk into a battle while keeping your ult on the entire time because you'll run out of mana by the time you return back into the battle.
I'd keep my head down if I were you.
Quinn will probably be one of the toughest matchups for Swain. Because she's ranged and typically runs Thunderlords during the laning phase, she will be able to match your poke with her quick poke. Her blind is also going to be one of your downfalls. The blind prevents you from maximizing your poke because you can't cast any of your spells. It's similar to how Graves is one of your biggest counters, because you can't see, you can't hit. Your birds actually don't know where to go, which means that you don't get any healing. So if she buys Executioners and Hexdrinker early with Merc Treads, she will not only deny your healing, but she won't die to you either. Quinn typically also goes for kill pressure and could run Ignite against you for even more kill pressure. So just be really careful when it comes to this matchup because she can kill you with her burst.
chaos will follow.
Renekton is a champion that is a rough matchup for Swain to deal with. The matchup can go in either player's favor. Renekton players typically take Fervor, Thunderlords, Grasp, or Colossus for their keystones. 2 of them are for fast burst, and the other 2 are for tanking and sustainability. You can poke him down and zone him from CS with Q, E, and autos, but be careful when he dashes to you because his dash range if he hits minions will double, and then he could just auto W, auto Q you for major harass and burst. You also feel really squishy early game, so you try to sit back and just farm it out. Renekton has a lot of kill potential, especially if he's running Ignite. You want to let the lane push towards you and farm safely near your tower. Renekton will also itemize the Bruiser build, consisting of Hexdrinker, Executioner's Calling, Merc Treads, and Spirit Visage to amplify his Q healing. Renekton will also pose a problem to you, and he can dunk your carries if you let him get really far ahead, because he'll want to finish his items with Black Cleaver and Titanic Hydra for major damage. Don't look to 1v1 him, just outfarm him.
A true hunter never rests.
So the Rengar matchup is a bit crazy for Swain. Rengar's passive allows him to hop a great distance when he's in a bush. In the top lane, bush control is really important, but even when you harass him, he can just tank it and jump on you constantly. He'll always be on top of you. This lane doesn't have to be a fight lane if that's the case, and it can instead be a farm lane. The reason is because Rengar's W empowered allows him to heal all of the harass that you deal to him. So in the end, even when you poke him down for CS, he just spams so much spells like Q, W, and E in order to build Fury, and then he just heals all of it back up. On top of that, a Rengar with a Doran shield and a 2 health potion start as well as early wards allows him to push into your tower, heal up all your harass, and stay safe. This allows not only him to be safe, but it allows you to be safe because you're going to be farming under your tower. After the laning phase, it becomes a matter of understanding your job as Swain and understanding what Rengar players are capable of doing. Rengar will probably try to delete your carries, so you gotta do the same thing to his carries. Snare Rengar and you're good.
Learn from your mistakes.
Riven has a lot of gap closers and is one of the more annoying matchups for Swain. You can sit back and wait to see what the opponent is skilling up. If the Riven skills up E at level 1, then try to constantly poke her to deny her from CSing and force her to use her E. If she skills up Q at level 1, sit back and avoid the knockup because her Q auto weaving combo is going to hurt, especially if she runs Fervor. The typical keystones a Riven player takes are Fervor, Thunderlords, or Colossus. Colossus will make her trades more efficient because she'll win the health war, Thunderlords makes her early trading more threatening, and Fervor makes her long-term trading a bit more powerful, especially when she's building all of the Fervor stacks up in order to all-in you. Once she's level 3, just be patient and poke. Catching her is the most difficult part because she can just use her E and Q to dodge your snare, so you want to aim your snare when you know for a fact one of those abilities is on cooldown.
Alright, I'm going.
For this matchup, you shouldn't worry too much about his Q Flame Spitter. Instead, worry about his shield and his E. Try to bait out his shield by poking him down with Q, E, and autos. The reason why is because when Rumble uses his combo, he'll shield to gain speed to close the distance, then light you up with his Q, and then slow you down to make sure that you stay in range for maximum damage. In this case, if you prevent him from using his shield offensively to run up to you, and force him to use it defensively to mitigate damage, then he's going to be the one on the back end. You can also buy Merc Treads to sustain versus him, since he'll build nothing but damage and Magic Pen. The level 6 is going to be different, as he can use his ultimate to clear the wave and deal damage to you at the same time. Be careful at 6, because it can also indicate a gank. He shreds through your health once he gets Leandries.
So I go.
Shed is a tank matchup, which is basically really easy for the most part. The guy has to be in melee range of you, and the only way he could get into melee range of you is if he uses his taunt to engage on you, which is easy to predict because he's just going to walk up aggressively unnecessarily. You will be able to poke him down with the typical QE auto combo, and he can't really do anything about it unless he uses his W to negate your autos, which doesn't really mean anything. So you just win this matchup. Also try to look for a snare whenever he casts his R.
I hear you.
This matchup favors you because it's basically like every other tank matchup, but what makes this matchup difficult is when Singe proxies. When Singe goes and proxy farms at level 1, you can chase him and push him away to stop the proxy. When he's level 9 and has maxed his poison trail, you as Swain can't really do anything about it because not only are you slow, but you end up eating his poison trail. On top of that, Swain's abilities don't deal that much damage, especially when Singe itemizes magic resist, and you need to be at least level 3 to have your snare. Even if you do have your snare, it's not easy to land when a Singe can just use his ghost and ultimate to run away safely. You need some sort of guaranteed hard CC like a TF gold card for example in order to land the snare. Singed also ramps up equally as well as Swain because of Rod of Ages, Liandry's, and Rylai's from pressure. You can kill Singed if he decides to lane, but if not, you'll have a rough time if your jungler doesn't intervene. If your jungler keeps coming up top, then Singed is doing his job because somewhere across the map, the enemy team might be securing an objective.
You reek of fear!
Sion is a very easy matchup, much like the other tanks. The only thing that you really have to avoid is his ultimate, which you can just sidestep because you hear him yell and he goes in a straight line. And then of course his Q knockup, which is channeled either for the full knockup or slight harass. This matchup involves you obtaining bush control because when Sion gets into a bush, he can just use his Q without you actually seeing the indicator. So having bush control top is really important in this matchup so that he doesn't catch you by surprise.
Yes, sir!
Teemo's a very easy matchup. The dude is squishy, and down the line, you get pretty tanky. The only problem is that he deals a bunch of burst damage. His typical keystones are Fervor, Deathfire, or Thunderlords. Teemos who itemize AP are going to be dealing a lot of damage to you via quick burst shots and using shrooms to their advantage, while AD Teemos are going to look to 1v1 you using Executioners, Blade of the Ruin King, and Hexdrinker. Some of the best Teemo players run AD Teemo for dueling potential. Your typical combo, however, of poking him is going to be Q, E, and auto attack, and you're going to try to look to pressure him for CS early. Just remember that he's ranged so that you'll have to walk up farther to hit him with your regular poke combo. He's also pretty mobile with his W, so keep that in mind when you're trying to go for a snare.
Time to troll!
Trundle is usually a pick players pick against bruisers or tanks in order to counter them in the mid to late game with Trundle's ultimate. Trundle steals away his target's AD with his Q, which you shouldn't have a problem with because you should not be in his range for him to use his quick auto attack Q auto attack combo on you. Usually for him to get that close, he'll use his pillar to knock you back and then his W to increase his movement speed to get to you, which you respond with your Q and snare. When it comes to lane harass, Trundle sustains himself whenever minions die near him, which means that even if you poke him, he'll get a bunch of his health back if the lane pushes or he gets last hits. Typically he'll also itemize like a bruiser, with his options as Merc Treads, Executioner's Calling, Hexdrinker, Spirit Visage because he attacks a lot and he gets a lot of lifesteal. His ultimate isn't super effective on you because you don't really have a lot of high defensive stats, at least not until he obtains Zanya's, but he can kill you if he manages to get on top of you and manages to wail the living crap out of you.
As you wish.
Pre-6, this matchup should be very easy because like all other melee matchups, you win the poke war. The only problem is at 6, he will start to pressure you. A smart Tryndamere would counter you by itemizing Executioner's Calling alongside Merc Treads and even Hexdrinker. This way, they'll never die to your damage, cut your healing, and then when he turns on his ultimate, just completely outscale you. Tryndamere has a gap closer as well as a strong slow, so after 6, you might be in some trouble. Play it safe, outfarm him as much as possible early on, and later on, he's going to crush you in the split push war. If needed, you could even build a Frozen Heart just to tank him, but not really recommended.
Sniveling cubs?
Volibear is a typical frontline tank, however, he offers his team initiation. You can harass him, but you have to be careful of his fling. It's basically similar to the Garen matchup in the sense that he can move really fast towards you, in which case you just respond with a Q to slow him down and run away. It's also really tough to kill Volibear because of his healing passive. In a sense, he has as much healing as Swain would have if he were healing in front of a bunch of minions. Once he gets Spirit Visage to amplify his healing, as well as the Merc Treads for shoes, you basically can't kill him. And Volibear has surprisingly big burst with his ult and his bite, so you should be careful against him post 6. Farm it out, and poke him consistently with your Kiwi auto attack combo.
They fear me. They should.
Warwick's pretty rough to deal with since he has a lot of gap closers that can chase you down and has a way to sustain your damage output, as well as suppress you at 6. Early game, of course, as usual, you'll win the poke war. His fear will probably be the easiest thing to avoid since you generally should be at a safe distance. With that being said, any form of movement that's aggressive from Warwick is usually an indicator of you getting ganked. Warwick builds Titanic Hydra as well as Spirit Visage, so he's gonna hurt. Just be careful and farm it out.
Who questions my ability?
Wukong's going to be a back and forth matchup for you. In the early game, if he starts E, he can basically win most trades against you. When he uses his E, he gains attack speed, and if he stays on you, he'll win the all-in due to the fact that he will auto you rapidly. With a Corrupting Potion start, you also take a lot of burn damage while he's also able to regain health. He is also able to deny your EQ with his W. Swain's Q cannot target invisible champions, so the bird will automatically default to targeting the clone, which means that you lose a lot of your damage, unless he reveals himself. He can also surprise you with big bursts, since Wukong players will typically run Thunderlords with his EQR combo. When you're knocked up, he can get a ton of damage off on you since you don't typically rush hard armor items like Seeker's Arm Guard or Ninja Tabi in the early game. You can poke him with E for CS, but if he tries to all-in you, you will typically lose trades. Yorick is a weird matchup. Swain is a mage, so his base built-in attack speed is rather slow. This is important because when you're chasing down a Yorick, they'll typically try to use that little mini Jarvan wall ability on you, which, if you don't dodge it, will prevent you from chasing and killing the Yorick. Poking him is quite simple, however. He only has one way to really hit you in the lane, which is that one projectile ability. Other than that, you win the poke war because you shouldn't be letting him walk up to you. When his little ghouls go on you, try not to use spells on them because they take too long to kill with your Q and E. Instead, auto-attack them because you'll one-shot them, which means you'll get mana back, which allows you to poke more. At level 6, you can just run him down with your ultimate. Just dodge his wall and you're basically set.
Playtime's over.
Ahri is one of the most common matchups in the mid lane for Swain. You'll see a lot of Ahris into Swain and vice versa. Ahri is a skill shot champion, which means that to win the matchup, you've got to be on your toes. When the early game comes, you want to wait and watch what she does. She throws a Q and you avoid it, you can just retaliate with a rotation of E, Q, and auto, while making sure to avoid the charm along the way. The more difficult part is when she hits 6. If she ults, you basically lose the kill, but if she doesn't ult, it's yours. Both of you have the potential to pressure because you can make catches with one ability, but it's easier to dodge the snare than it is to dodge the charm.
I shall endure.
This matchup is going to involve a lot of movement. Pre-level 6, you're going to have to try to avoid her Q and E, because if you get hit by her Q and E, it'll proc Thunderlords, and that's going to be a chunk of your HP. However, your counter poke with Q, E, and auto is actually able to equal out the trade, since Anivia is fairly fragile. Try not to dive Anivia if she has passive. When it comes to your spell rotations, if you use your full combo to kill her, then her passive acts up, you basically act as a really big minion throwing energy bolts at the egg, which isn't really effective. This is basically a farm matchup that favors you if you move a lot to actively avoid the snare until level 6. At level 6, you're going to be pressured on your tower. Given that Anivia players will always build tier, they'll always have more mana to use their ult and shove your minions under tower. At this point, you can expect Anivia to roam or attack your tower, in which case you'd have to respond with your ult to push it back, but responding with your ultimate extends a ton of your mana, and that's really ineffective. You could try to get an advantage early to pressure Anivia so that even if she pushes you under turret, you can kill her so, she can't push back. But for the most part, just try your best to farm because it's going to be a farm lane.
I want a turn.
Pre-level 6, you can pressure her because you can shove more effectively than she can. If you force Annie under tower, she has to make the choice of taking CS with her autos, which are slower than her Q's animation, or use spells to lose her passive for her stun. Once Annie is 6, if she's holding Ignite, she will blow you up. Don't engage her unless you have Flash. Your best bet is to poke her with your Q safely, and then kill her when she's low. If she has Flash, she can threaten your life with the Flash Tibbers and her full combo. If she has Ignite, she basically wins because she cuts your healing when you have your ult on. If she has no Ignite, but she has Flash, your likelihood of living is actually a lot longer. Your best bet is to rush Banshee's Veil after your Rod of Ages and also grab Merc Tread, since those items will help you mitigate the damage that she drops.
Tragic.
So I don't have any experiences myself as Aurelion Sol versus Swain, but I know that based on Asol's kit, Asol has the power to make a lot of map pressure early with powerful roams. He pushes really fast compared to what Swain could do, and from some of the gameplay footage here, I noticed that this player takes Corrupting Potion. Personally, Corrupting Potion is good, but it's more optimally used in top lane. But I also think that in this matchup specifically, if you take it, it's a good way to obtain a lot of mana to counter push mid and poke a little bit harder. You can also build Merc Treads to become more durable, or Swiftness Boots, which I don't really recommend you do this, in order to match his roams. Swain's strength comes from skirmishes, so this is something that you could try to take advantage of. So Azir is a very rough matchup if you step out of bounds. Azir is a long-range lane bully and a pusher when it comes to his soldiers. Usually champions like Victor or Xerath are good picks into him because of their long range and safe wave clear. Swain's best chance of survival is patience and usage of Q. It's very rare that you should be walking up and E-autoing. It's also not very easy to snare Azir because he can just easily escape with his soldier dashing. You also can't just walk up to him at 6 because he can dash behind you and ult you into tower range or just ult you away from him in general. This lane becomes a very farm-based movement lane. You have to move a lot to get out of his soldier auto attack range. If you feel like you're taking too much harass from him, or will take a lot of damage from his combo, which usually procs Thunderlords, then you have to relinquish some CS to stay alive. Brand is actually a rough matchup for Swain. Brand has a lot of burst damage, so you have to be on your toes with the matchup because typically he's going to use his W on the backline and then he's going to use his E to spread the damage out. You have to stay very far back and try to poke him when his spells are down and only when his spells are down. Otherwise you're going to be taking a lot of explosive damage. If he ever gets 3 spells off on you, you're basically dead because, you know, W, E, Q, you're stunned. And then afterwards, the explosive from your passive. And if he's level 6, his R is just going to start bouncing off of minions or something and it's going to crush you. Merc Treads and Banshees are extremely good in this matchup.
Think what I could offer.
This matchup favors Cassiopeia for the most part. Cassiopeia does a lot of damage whether or not she lands her Q. This matchup requires you to be moving a lot to avoid her Q and really get out of her range. Try to poke her with your Q, but don't be going in for E auto trades as much because you'll wind up getting too close to her and take 2 or more E trades from her in return, which skewer the matchup in her favor because she does a lot of damage. If she takes Storm Raiders over Deathfire, she'll be able to run you down without even using her Ghost. This matchup is going to require you to sacrifice some CS in order to survive it.
You used to be cool.
This is a favored matchup provided that you dodge Echo's Q. Echo is melee, so he has to walk up to CS if he isn't using his Q. If you dodge his Q, you can return trade with a typical EQ auto combo. The only problem is that when he uses his Q, he's going for minion kills or he's pushing the lane, so you might lose some CS if you let it shove into your tower. You can snare him and try to all-in him pre-6 because once he is 6, you have to be patient on your snare. He will ult, and if you snared him before he considered ulting, then he will not be able to cast his ult. If you snare him after he ults, you can chase him down easily. Avoid his Q. If he tumbles forward, back up because he usually attempts to fight. And of course, stay away from parallel convergence.
To the briny deep.
So this Fizz matchup favors you if you win the mind game. But first and foremost, just keep in mind that Biz does a lot of damage. And by a lot of damage, I mean a lot of damage. Like whether or not he has his ultimate. Anyway, let's get on to the mind game. Well, we know how frustrating Fizz is because of his E, which means that you can't really snare him because he's just going to E out of it, right? So how do I bait out the E? Well, poke him down with your Q autos or E autos constantly. If he holds his E, you just keep poking. But you never all in him until you're sure that he's going to use his E to run away. If he's low enough, a Fizz player might just panic E to negate the damage off the Q or E, and then you just do a deep snare, and you'll land it, and you got him. Rush Zhonya's after your Hourglass if you can in order to negate his fish. That's the biggest tip that I can give.
We must all make our choices.
So Karma's a tough champion to deal with in lane. Karma has a shield that can absorb your typical QE poke, which allows her to basically kind of win every single trade. She maxes her Q to counter trade with your poke, and if she uses RQ on you, she'll hurt like a truck. The width of her empowered Q skill shot is really wide, and the secondary part of the Q forces you to move out of it, otherwise you take a bunch of damage. If she RWs you while using her E to run up to you, she will stay on top of you, heal off of any poke that you throw at her, snare you, and then heal again, and then hit you with her Q. She'll also rush Morelos to cut your healing in half at 6, and she offers her team a locket and a talisman for team fights during her mid game with her RE combo. If I were to say something, I don't recommend fighting Karma. I recommend sitting far back, using your Q to farm, and taking teleport summoner spell to handle her roams and her poke. Karma will roam a lot because she could just E herself and then run down to top or bottom lane in order to assist her teammates. So I recommend taking teleport to match that.
The kiss of death.
This is a farm matchup because Karthus just sits back and presses Q to farm at a really safe and far distance, and if you poke him, he just backs up even farther than he already is. Your best bet is to shove him into the tower using your Q. You can poke him down under the tower, just make sure you don't get hit in return. When it comes to all-inning him, he has no escapes, and he's pretty slow, so just blow your combo on him and he dies. Pretty easy matchup. If you don't kill him, you'll at least out-farm him.
As you wish.
For the most part, Kassadin's Q allows him to negate your E auto trades in the early game because the shield that is generated from his Q will negate the damage generated from your E, which means that you're only dealing auto attack damage to him. Unless you bait out his Q before throwing out your E, then waiting for his shield to drop, then E autoing him, your trades will always be in his favor because he gets free damage on you whilst negating your magic damage. You could poke him with your QE auto combo when he tries to go in CS, which forces him to either take your Q's damage all the way, and he reciprocates by throwing a Q back at you to get a shield to absorb your damage, or he loses the CS just to escape the Q's range. Since he's melee, it'll definitely favor you, but just keep in mind that a Kassadin player will typically master Q ability, which means that the shield will be bigger. He's also rather slippery with his ultimate at 6, so catching him with your snare is going to be rough at that level.
Is that fear I smell?
In general, Katarina is a very annoying champion to play against. For Swain, you can easily poke her down with your QE auto combo because she walks close to last hit. If she's using her daggers to last hit, be aware that if she hops onto them, you'll take a bunch of damage. So you can drop your bird on top of the daggers to catch her if you think she's going to go for an all-in. Typically, because she's slippery, it's hard to pinpoint exactly where she'll be, because she'll usually jump to escape your Q range. Swain possesses no hard CC to stop Katarina's ultimate, so back off of the ult range if she starts channeling it. You win the poke war, but she'll win the all-in war. Try your best not to let her all-in you, because we all know what it's like to play versus a fed Katarina.
Are you certain?
So LeBlanc has a lot of burst potential. She used to build full AP, but since they nerfed that, LeBlanc players now build Hextech Gunblade and Lich Bane, because the idea behind her trades are now short, quick, and explosive bursts. In order for you to deal with this, you should first avoid her chain. LeBlancs will dash in and chain you. You can simply respond with a sidestep, or with an E, and then try to Q her where her initial jumping point is, because then the LeBlanc must decide if she wants to hop back and eat all the Q damage, which automatically locks onto her because you tagged her with your E, or just stay up front, get zoned, and potentially get rooted. You can also sustain through her burst once you get your bird full.
But all my light puns would have brightened your day.
Lux is quite a strong laner. Typically, Lux players will be taking Ghost, Barrier, or Exhaust as a secondary summoner spell aside from their Flash. For this matchup, as long as you don't get bound, you can basically pressure her. While she may farm far back with her E and think about how safe she must be, you can easily dunk her with your combo. This matchup, however, can swing either way, because if you make a misstep and get hit by the binding or eat all of her poke and you die to her full combo, or if you think you have a kill but then she turns it around or barrier exhausts you and you miscalculate or something, you basically swing the matchup in her favor. She rushes Morellos and then she rushes Merc Treads, and basically you're kind of screwed. So avoid her binding at all costs, because if she lands her binding, her full combo will land.
It is done.
So Malzahar is actually a pretty even matchup. When he has a lot of AP, he has a lot of pushing potential and can poke you with Morello's and Leandri's damage with his Space Aids ability. He can't always kill you unless you get really poked down by him though, as he stands still and can't cast any abilities when he ults. He also negates one of your abilities with his shield passive, so you usually want to use either your auto attack or your E to break the shield, then poke him down with your Q. Malzahar is definitely immobile, so you can use that to your advantage as Swain. You also heal off of his Voidlings with your ultimate, so take advantage of that when you're all-inning him. Just make sure you use your E first, and then afterwards you want to follow up with your Q, then your W. If he doesn't have flash, you basically have the kill in the bag. Some players like to take QSS versus Malzahar, and that's still a very viable option.
The ball is angry.
Orianna is a back and forth matchup, but it usually favors Orianna. At level 1, you take E, but then she takes E also. If you E auto her, she can do the same to you. Her passive allows for powerful trading, especially since she also runs Thunderlords. Her ball will also be able to zone you from CSing, and one misstep would allow her to kill you, especially at 6. You can poke her and kill her, of course. Orianna is a very mechanical champion, involving a lot of micromanagement and excellent skills to maximize her abilities. A player might try to harass with Q, but then not be able to dodge or snare at the same time, in which case Swain punishes. Orianna will typically build Morellos, then Leandri's, then a Death Cap, as well as Sorcerer's Shoes rather than Merc Treads. She also does a ton of damage late game, so watch your squishy marksman player. All in all, this is the matchup where you gotta be on your toes and you gotta really know what you're doing.
People fear what they cannot understand.
Syndra is a very aggressive mid laner. We all know about her combo at level 6 where she just presses R to win. Against Swain, it's really no different. Early on when you try to CS, make sure you watch yourself because she can Q you while you're CSing. Take note that she can move while she's casting Q, so if you try to return Q in order to trade with her, she can walk out of it faster than you can walk out of hers. Her stun and Thunderlords combo is very powerful against you in the early game, and at level 6 she basically wins. The best thing you can do in this matchup early is not to harass her until she uses her Q. Her Q is going to be usually used on creeps. If she skills up W and uses it, when she picks up a minion or a ball, just back up because you don't know where she's going to toss it, either on the minions or at you directly. Identify that all of her spells are threats and deal a bunch of damage, but once she uses them, she's basically a big creep. And you know what we do to big creeps, right? We hit them. At 6, pray, because you'll die if she lands her combo. If you land your snare and your Q, don't walk up to her immediately in a straight line. Instead, move in a zigzag pattern, because the natural response for a Syndra is to stun you immediately. But if you avoid that stun by moving in a zigzag pattern, you can get closer to her and hit her with your spells, whereas she can't because you dodged it.
Grounded?
Taliyah has a lot of shoving potential with her Q, which allows her to push the living heck out of your creep wave, and can poke you down pretty fast with Thunderlords. She can also threaten your life with her knockback to set up for kills, especially when a jungler is nearby. Taliyah has a lot of surprise burst and shoving potential in the early game, so you'll be playing under the tower for the most part, because Swain can't push as fast as Taliyah can. As a result, I recommend taking the Siege Mastery in the Resolve tree, since the extra armor and magic resist can help you stay durable. She has the ability to roam swiftly down to bot lane with her ultimate, or top lane, and with Ghost at her disposal. She can catch you relatively fast. For this matchup, I recommend taking Doran Shield as a starting item, and for Harass, the usual combo of QE auto attacking to poke, but it's harder to poke her because she can poke you back. I recommend also running Teleport to heal up in the case that you get poked down, or using it to match the roam that Taliyah drops.
Pathetic.
Talon's another AD matchup that's pretty easy for Swain. For the most part, the typical E harass with your Q is the way to go for lane trading. He can trade back with you with his rake ability, which stays out for some time. If he chooses to run away and starts jumping over walls, you'll never catch him, especially when he's 6, since he'll just stealth and run. He can itemize an early Hex Drinker, Executioners, and Merc to be able to tank your damage, and then his combo of QW after jumping on you is really strong. But because it's melee, if you poke him enough, you can go for early kill pressure. Zhonya's is your best friend in this matchup, and typically if you just dodge the rake poke, you'll have everything in your control.
I reckon.
TF is a relatively easy matchup for Swain. TF's strength doesn't come from his laning, but more of his level 6 usage of his ultimate. This is where you can take Teleport if you think you can match his roams. You can take Ignite if you wish to pressure him in the early game. Use your QE auto attack combo to zone him from CSing, or drive him away to a safe range. He'll usually end up using his Q from a distance to farm minions, but eventually he'll have to walk up to blue card minions to sustain his mana, which is where you take advantage of the opportunity and poke him down. He's very immobile early, but he'll typically run move speed Quince alongside Ghost or Ignite as his summoner spell. If you take Teleport, you can always match his roam by TPing to where he appears. If he uses his Q excessively, that means that he will not have enough mana to be able to jump down into the bot lane or the top lane using his ultimate. TF has to make a choice when he uses his ultimate. Do I sacrifice the damage for the tower, or do I get this roam off?
Your commands tire me!
Aw, yeah. Alright, this matchup is one that swings in Swain's favor. So Veigar has to start Q as the source of damage. All you have to do as Swain is just dodge it and hit him with E auto trades. If you hit 2, he's probably going to skill up Cage at 2 himself, but that's okay. You have a narrow window to dodge inside the cage, but you can easily hit him with a QE auto harass. When you're 3, you can all-in him with a full combo if he makes a mistake, because as soon as you avoid his Q, even if you get in his cage and you get hit by his W, you should be fine and he won't be. If he elects to stay, he'll die due to your damage, but other than that, you win this lane and can ramp up fast. The only problem is the longer the game drags on, the more items he'll get. Once he gets Morellos and farms enough of his Q, he'll start dealing damage to you and cutting your healing down. You typically won't be building magic resist against him, since for the most time you should be able to stomp him in lane, which means that you get your core, but most of your core consists of armor. If the game drags on for an extremely long period of time, your best bet is to get either Spirit Visage or Banshee's Veil to mitigate the damage, but his burst will always just 100 to 0 you. Press R and win. Don't let the game get too late, otherwise you're screwed.
That's unexpected.
Vel'koz is a long-range poke champion that can burst you down really fast at level 6. Swain struggles against those that are long-range because he has to walk up more in order to attempt to harass them, and they can just return fire. Against Vel'koz, your best bet is to punish him when he's behind the mage minions. Vel'koz has a tough time last hanging under towers, so shoving with your Q is the best way to gain a lead. Alt-inning him is also rough because his level 6 burst is very powerful, especially with the true damage that he can drop on you. I recommend running Teleport into this matchup as well as Doran's Shield, in the case that you get poked down and you have to recall to sustain yourself.
I'm absolutely livid.
In the early game, you deal a lot of damage against Vladimir. Early on, you can trade E and Qs with him, but he'll even it out with his Q and empowered Q. He can also dodge your snare with his W. For you to dodge his E, you just hide behind minions. This matchup favors Swain because you poke more heavily, but Vladimir will always be able to sustain it. Unfortunately, after a certain point in the game, Vladimir becomes unkillable, in which case you should consider itemizing Morellonomicon in order to cut down his healing.
Simple fools.
This is a long-range poke matchup. Like all the skill shot champions, this matchup will be played from afar. Do your best to farm and poke with your Q. You don't want to walk up to E auto trade because you'll get a slow and a stun thrown at you. Sure, you might dodge the stun, but sometimes it's just not worth it, as you put yourself in danger. In the mid and late game, however, Xerath will outshine you in teamfights because Xerath has long range and you're mostly in the front line. A good Xerath player would not be in range of anyone, which is why some of the best non-scripting Xerath players have very low deaths. They aren't supposed to die in general, so he'll be in the backline shooting fire at your team, whereas you should be in the front line soaking up damage from the enemy team and trying to see if you can grab people with your snare.
No cure for fools.
This is a frustrating matchup for you because Yasuo has a lot of mobility. His wind wall negates all of your abilities except for your snare. Your bird will die, your E will disappear, and your birds don't go in and out. In the early game, you win most trades with your E auto combo. Move around a lot and watch Yasuo. You'll want to watch him for his Q. When he gets his tornado, he'll have an aura around him. This way you could know, I gotta dodge this, and you want to sidestep it. At 6, if you dodge this tornado, you basically win. You just turn on your ultimate and walk around his wind wall, and you should be able to sustain yourself through him. Typical AD champions will build Hexdrinker, Executioners, and Merc Treads, and Yasuo is just no exception to that. Yasuo is very annoying due to the fact that his E will allow him to move to avoid your Q's maximum radius, so when you poke him, just hold on to your Q when he starts CSing rather than just blindly throwing it down there and allowing him to E his way through your minions and maneuver out of its range, because you'll lose damage.
Do not deny me.
Pre-6, if you dodge his Q and stay away from his Shadow E and his Shadow Q, you basically win. Zed has to play extremely safe for the first 3 levels. At level 1, you can E auto poke trade him if you dodge his Shuriken. He pretty much loses every trade. At level 2, if he opts to take Shadow, you can still pressure him if you predict the Shadow and where the Shadow's Shuriken is gonna go. If he doesn't use his Shadow aggressively, then he'll be using it defensively, which you can call your jungler for. You can also let the lane push towards your tower and freeze it just in front of the tower, and then just start poking him and zoning him with EQ. This way, Zed counters you at 6. His burst is actually really high, since you don't typically rush Zhonya's right away. Zed will rush Hexdrinker, Merc Treads, and Executioner's Calling, and then at that point, you're basically screwed, even if you try to build defensively. His all-in combo is kind of hard to predict, but you will die typically. What you can do is you can snare yourself as soon as he ults, because Zed usually appears behind you, then full combo him, and then run into tower and stuff.
I'm going!
This is a poke matchup, and you guys can easily outtrade each other. The issue is that his Minefield procs Thunderlords, and Ziggs buys Morellos. So if you ult and just blindly walk through his Minefield, you're just going to lose a lot of health unnecessarily. And Ziggs has a lot of disengage with his satchel to jump away. He also pushes a lot faster than you because of his Q wave clear. For the most part, you straight win a duel against him if you dodge his Q and avoid his jumping satchel, but you're going to be losing the CS war because he's going to push to your tower, he's going to be able to clear the way faster, and he can also destroy your tower instantly if you try to do anything against him. You should take Doran's shield in this matchup because if you get poked down and you don't have teleport, it's a good way to sustain yourself in the lane.
Inevitably.
Zelina is a very annoying matchup. You can throw 1 Q, but he can throw 2 Qs, and you have to move away from that. It's because if he does it correctly, he can push you to walk one side of the lane where the enemy jungler just comes into that side and then you just walk into a skill shot. And then if you walk back, you also get hit by his double bombs. So he also moves really fast. So this means that he can just get out of your snare range even if you do Q him. And of course, even if you do kill him, he still has his revival ultimate, which means that during a team fight, if he plays it right, he can revive someone from the backline. So for this matchup, you kind of just want to farm it out and roam before he does. I recommend taking teleport in this matchup. So now that I've covered the matchups for Swain, there are a lot of points in the previous chapter that I've listed that were repeated. This is where we enter the next chapter, countering Swain. So as we know, Swain is immobile. He has a small form of disengage with his Q, but Q can only stop one target, and that target can just get out of its range by moving to the side. His snare has a really long cast time, so upon it being cast, you have a window of opportunity to move away from it. The typical way a player should be aligning their Q and W is via a Venn diagram. This way, if someone runs, they run into the snare, and if they avoid the snare, they just eat more Q damage. In the early game, ganking Swain and kicking the old and decrepit man while he's down is the best way to go. Swain has to build Rod of Ages first, and has a terrible last hitting animation, especially if he doesn't have the Tyrant Swain skin. So you're basically delaying his Roa and Roa scaling. If that's the case, what that means is it'll take an abnormally long amount of time to ramp up. If you're a tank, and both you and Swain are level 6, all you have to do is itemize magic resist. When the jungler ganks, you kind of just chase him down because he'll eventually run out of mana with his ultimate, and then he'll be in his human form with no mana, and then he's under tower, then you just kill him because he's basically a big minion that can just move and auto attack. In terms of items, here's a list of items that are optimal that can counter Swain based on the kind of champion that you play. The global boots item is going to be Merc Treads. Fairly obvious, but a lot of players are now building tanky shoes instead of damage-based shoes like Berserker's Greaves or Sorcerer's Shoes. Merc Treads will reduce the duration of his snare and his Q slow, as well as make you more durable. First, for AD champions, let's start with Hexdrinker. This item will grant you a passive that gives you a spell shield upon low health. This is useful because Swain's main objective is to poke you down, then snare you to all-in you. The shield can save your life from his kill pressure. This item costs 1300 gold and is a fairly cheap component that you can buy on your first back. Next, let's move on to Executioner's Calling. This item is only 800 gold and reduces the healing that Swain's ultimate gives him at level 6. Next, we move on to Maw Malmortius. So basically this is an upgraded version of the Hexdrinker and just grants more damage and gives you a lifesteal when the shield procs at the same time, which allows you to win the duel against Swain. Next, Moral Reminder. This item extends from Executioner's Calling, which is optimal against Swain because he builds Zanya's Hourglass and sometimes he builds Ninja Tabi, so this will allow you to deal more damage to him because you pierce his armor. For champions with on-hit effects, Wit's End is also an extremely powerful item. Due to them building Hurricane and having high attack speed, Wit's End allows them to gain more magic resist and shred through Swain while being more durable at the same time. Next, for tank or bruiser champions, start off with the starting item of Doran's Shield. This item will allow you to regenerate some early health when you take damage from Swain's Q, W, or E auto combo. Then, we have Spectre's Cowl. This is basically the same cost as Hexdrinker. It's 1200 gold for an item that gives you a fair amount of health and magic resist as well as health regeneration upon taking damage from an enemy champion. Then we also have Adaptive Helm. As much as I don't see this item being purchased, it's pretty strong against Swain, because all of his damage for the next 4 seconds after is reduced by 15%. Since Swain's damage is primarily dots, his overall damage output is greatly mitigated. Then we have Spirit Visage. This item is mainly for bruisers like Renekton, who have some innate way of healing through their kit, or are running Grasp with the Undying as their keystone. This grants cooldown reduction and amplifies healing, allowing for long, sustained combat. The longer you last against Swain, the more likely he is to run out of mana. For mages, Banshee's Veil is really the only magic resist item against Swain. If Swain is looking to 1v1, he'll have to turn on his ultimate and let a crow hit you first, which is blocked, or if he tries to be really aggressive and reckless, he'll waste one of his abilities like his E, or grip you with a snare when the shield's up and you'll block it. So something interesting I mentioned was how blinds affected Swain. Quinn, Yasuo, and Graves are the 3 champions you have to be careful of when you're playing as Swain. I mentioned how important it was to control the bush as Swain. This is because your Q and your R cannot interact if they cannot see, if you have no vision. If the target enters the bush and your Q is standing just outside the bush, it will stop locking onto the target and just sit there. Your bursts from your R will also not fly to a target that is in a bush if you have no vision of that bush. This applies to when you get blinded as well. So if Quinn uses her Q or Graves uses his smokescreen W, your birds can't fly out and your abilities are harder to land because you can't really click on anybody. Yasuo exists as a threat because his wind wall kills your Q, negates your E, and all your birds that fly out don't actually fly out, they just get eaten up by the wind wall. Having a Graves and a Yasuo on the enemy team makes it harder for you to do things, so you have to just sit back and avoid them or walk around them. If your ultimate is on, you'll spend more time walking around their wind wall and smokescreen and lose a bunch of mana while that's happening, which is one of the best ways to counter Swain, attacking his mana, not his health. I chose Swain as my champion not only because I find him fun, but I love his title. He's known as the Master Tactician. being a support main for so long and a coach who understands a lot about macro, I feel that he was the champion for me because I don't have mechanics, but I do have a lot of game knowledge and strategies to play out, which is where Swain's title fits me as a player. With that being said, I'd like to thank you guys for watching. This is my first real guide on a champion and going in depth on the champion's abilities and matchups and spells and everything like that, and I really enjoyed making it. I hope to hear some feedback on how I did.